Hello again, everybody on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in again and watching our channel here, Dave's Garage. So we're continuing our gearbox conversion, adapter plate, and seeing if we can get a Mark 1 MX5 gearbox to suit the ST170 engine. So on this episode, we're going to mess around with the clutch and see what we can do to make a hybrid clutch for that gearbox to fit the engine. Now, it's been a bit of a chore list, as I've ordered about 3 or 4 different clutch kits. I'm actually spending more money doing this than I would have been to just do an RX8 box, but hey, we're learning along the way, and hopefully if this does work, then it'll be useful for somebody else. So there's a few lessons I've learned in this one. You'll see as we come on to it as to which clutch pressure plates and clutch discs and flywheels and so on to be used. But happily, it has all bolted up, and it does work, and you'll see that as we crack on through the video. So thanks again for watching. Hope you enjoy, and please subscribe if you don't already. So I need a 220mm clutch to fit that flywheel, and that's a 1.8 Mondeo flywheel, and that's a 2-litre Mondeo flywheel, which will fit a 240mm clutch. So I've got a 240mm clutch that will suit that. So we've got this is a Mazda 626 plate, which is 225mm, but does fit the gearbox nicely. Fits on the splines lovely, so that's all well and good. And it will fit on the 2-litre flywheel with the Ford pressure plate. Okay, that's dandy. You think, right, that's the answer. That though won't fit in there because it's too big and fat, so that's not going to work. So that's money down the pan for that. Now this is just too big to fit that flywheel, and the pressure plate for that, which is this one, it just doesn't fit in the pressure plate, so that's probably not going to work. And this is the original MX5 clutch. Well, this is just too skinny anyway. And by the time I got that in there, it's touching hardly any of the friction surface is touching hardly any of the actual flywheel, so you're only going to end up with sort of a little narrow band like that, and that's going to slip horribly, so that won't work either. I am tempted to see if I can just shave off a couple of mil out from the outside of this one to make it a 220 plate. Annoyingly, these are on the, when I ordered this, it's advertised as a 220 plate, but it's actually not. It's 225mm. So I could chuck this up, I suppose, in the lathe and take a couple of mil off of this to make it down to 20. So I need to take 2.5mm off this to make it to a 20mm plate, 220mm plate, which would then fit that. But the question is then, will that fit in the gearbox? Let's have a look, see the answer to that will be on this. So yes, is the answer to that. Okay, that will fit in there. Okay, that might be the answer. So if I stick that on the lathe, take a bit off that, obviously wearing dust mask and what have you, because clutch friction material is not, there's no asbestos in it anymore, but I just still don't want to be breathing that in. Okay, I'll have a think about how we can get that in the lathe and then see what we can come up with. Right, well, there goes that idea, because that is too big to go in the lathe without catching on that bit there. So okay, time to put my thinking cap on. Okay, so one bit of good news, I've just chucked the MX5 clutch disc in there just so I could bolt the pressure plate to the flywheel and put it in the gearbox, and that turns nicely and doesn't catch in anything. So that's a positive. Now I'm just got to work out how I can make the Mazda 626 plate a bit smaller. Okie dokie, this is what I've come up with, which is almost certainly a terrible idea. So the centre of the clutch plate, the splines, is 22mm. So that works well. 22mm pipe, I've bushed that out. So everything is bang on central. So that now will fit on there quite tightly like so. Bolt that down, spin the drill, and you can see now if I spin that, it's clocking nicely against that, so it's not I'm not losing. It's bang on centre, because obviously this has to be absolutely bang on centre when we cut it. So bolt that up, then you just get it spinning, get a grinder on it, and just take a couple of mil off it. So what's it can happen? Right, okay. Alright, let's see how we're looking now. Now I did check before I did this. There's no asbestos in these discs. So before I started spraying asbestos all around the garage, I did check on that first. Okay, so will it work? That's a question. Well, it fits in there now. So let's see if it will clamp up. I've done a bit of Googling as well, and it would appear that the 1.8 MX5 clutch disc is 215mm. So I've ordered one of them, and if that fits, then I'll use that. Because this might just be a case of messing around with this for mocking up. Right, so let's see how that works, if at all. Promising. It looks promising. The clutch fingers are pulling in nicely as it was clamping down. It has clamped down. Okay, so next thing I want to do is get this all onto the engine and get the gearbox bolted up to it and see what we got by ways of clutch actuation. That's the next challenge. I do have a problem with my starter motor setup. We'll come back to that. I'll explain about that in a moment. But it turns out that starter motor is a bit fat. Yep, I've lost one of the bolts, but I've got an ARP set on order, so don't worry about that. We also won't be using these to hold my clutch on, because these are stainless, and these again just mocking up. I'll order the right bolts for this. Probably we'll use cap heads. I use 10.9 cap heads for it. Right, time of truth. Will the gearbox fit on? Do my bolts line up? Is it gonna work? news. Somebody did mention, and I think it was Super Loopy 22, you mentioned about making sure the gear, you had to clock the gearbox and the bell housing into place. I looked into that, and that's not so crucial. The reason that why you guys do that, because the bearings on some gearboxes have got these funny bevel bearings, and the input shaft will waggle around like something chronic. But these have got a decent bearing that will take a side load. So what that means is the input shaft, you want it central of course, but it doesn't have to be within the 50 thou that they specify. There could be a fair bit more tolerance in it than that. So that is very good news, makes fitting the gearbox a lot easier. Right, let's get the thing tightened up and see if you've got clutch actuation. I've got a bit of play on the clutch, so that's a good start. Lovely, excellent. So that's also good news. We've got nice action on that the clutch. So I'm calling that a win. Right, so that's all good news. The clutch is working nicely. I've got this to bolt up through. I drilled through from the other side just to open that hole out a little bit, just to get that, so that clamps nicely there. So I'm quite comfortable with how the bell housing clamps onto the block. You may notice that it's nice and shiny. I got carried away with the this. Just give it a clean up. It's a bit nicer to work with. Right, the starter motor. This is a pain in the neck as it happens, because I've already made the adapter plate for it, so I'm going to have to work out if I can get the better one. So the starter motor is too fat, and what's happening is it's catching on that rib there. It's a blinking menace, to be honest. So that rib coming down there is, you can see on the starter motor where it's been catching on the label there. And when I was messing around with the thin plate, it didn't show up because there was enough flex in it for that to flex out that. But with it all nice and bolted up like this and trying it, it's just getting all jammed up because it ain't where it needs to be. So what I need to do is work out if I can get a slimmer starter motor. Well, the good news on that front is it is definitely a Ford starter motor because it lines up. This is a bell housing off an old Pinto powered Sierra. So this is possibly one of the starter motor that came with that setup. So what it does mean is I just need to order a starter motor or find a starter motor because you've got a slimmer body than that. The modern starter motors tend to be a lot slimmer because they're better design. So we'll come back to that. And the next challenge will be shortening this arrangement here. Now somebody, I've forgotten who, mentioned that this has been done and there are YouTube videos about this. It's a popular thing to do with the RX-7s apparently, so this is good news. So my plans to move that forward is definitely doable. So we'll do that on the next video. Right, that's enough fun for this video. So the lessons we've learned with this is 2 litre Mondeo flywheel is too fat for this little gearbox. Might be alright for an RX-8, I can't remember. I seem to remember I used the 1.8 flywheel in that too. Yeah, it must have been because it's a flywheel that came off my walk-up engine, which is a 1.8 engine. So 1.8 flywheel. We're looking at, we'll come back to the clutch disc for definite, but we're looking like a 1.8 clutch disc from a Mazda MX5, early NA or NB. And the pressure plate then from 1.8 on there, and it has to be the 220mm clutch. There are two that are available. There's a 220 and a 240. The 240 is no good. They badge it as suitable for the 1.8, but it's not. So if you're doing this, you need a 220mm clutch plate, pressure plate, and then a 220 clutch plate from a Mazda. So thanks for watching. It's a little bit a bit further forward now. We've got it actually bolted to the box, got the clutch working and actuating. So that's a real step forward. That is. I wasn't entirely expecting that to work. So what that means is the release bearing is nesting nicely into the clutch, the pickup forks around those, and it did all look like it was all matching up okay when I eyeballed it. So that's all good news. So thanks again for watching. If you're a watcher and not a subscriber, please do subscribe. We're over the 4,000 subscribers now, so that's mega. So that's really, it's crawling up very nicely. It's gaining momentum brilliantly. So thanks very much for subscribing. Thank you for your comments. Your comments you mentioned about the gear stick and the clutch plate, and even about the bearing. You just give me the heads up about centralising everything. It gives me the heads up that was something that had to be done. So it's very interesting to see the YouTube videos about how to clock in a bell housing properly. But thankfully we don't need to do that with this. As long as it's central enough and it engages into the clutch, it's going to be fine, because it isn't going to go anywhere else, because the pilot bearing will hold it in place. And the good news is as well, the output shaft of this gearbox just creeps into the pilot bearing. So it's not a lot, it's about 5mm in, but it's just enough to centralise it and keep it where it should be. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks again for watching. See you on the next one.